Are you feeling a little fatigued with your war games being a little too cold, calculated, and competitive? Do you strive for something a little bit more narrative, but you don't know where to start? Well, in this video, I'm going to be breaking down my 4 typical steps with my 10 years of experience of writing narrative campaigns for MiniWarGaming. And in addition to that, a simple document linked in the description down below to elaborate on these 4 steps I'm going to go over with you in this video on how you can start your own narrative campaigns at home with your group of friends, or at least inspire you to. Now, the point of this video is to describe the process I go through when running my campaigns. And I'm a mechanical player. I like mechanical implications in my campaigns, even more important than the overall narrative of the campaign myself. And if you're like me, then hopefully this video will help you out, at least inspire you or get your foot in the door to running your own campaigns with your own group of friends. As opposed to pickup games just being done when they're done. And you might have some memorable moments from it, but ultimately that's pretty much all you're getting out of them, which is fine, of course. But, if you're watching this video, you're probably looking for a little bit more. My other reason I love campaigns is it gives you a good reason to see a game through as well, good or bad. A lot of the time you can play a game. If it's a pickup game, it's kind of mathematically over at a certain point, maybe 50 to 75% of the way through it. If you play it enough, you can kind of see the writing on the wall. You just kind of pack it up. You're like, oh, good game. That's it. Let's clean up and we'll head on back home or something like that. Maybe that kind of bothers you a little bit, that you can kind of see the end of a game before it actually comes to its end and you want to play it through all the way. Well, that's another reason campaigns are good. Everything I'm going to mention in these next few segments are going to be directly related to the document in the description down below, kind of meant to work with both or explain my thoughts on them, because I never elaborate too much in the document. It's always a rough draft. But I get a lot of questions about how I come up with my campaign, so I figured I'd make this video to describe that process. I've had a lot of experience running these campaigns, like I mentioned before, and these are all inspired by my favorite mechanics I've come by through the years, mostly from video games, if I'm gonna be honest. I usually like to play a lot of role-playing games and a lot of map-based games. So that's typically where I get all my inspiration from. And for me, the most important part is you don't need to really have a story to start devising a campaign. Now, a lot of you might prefer to have that. I like to structure it out, see what I've come up with, and just kind of figure out what campaign fits the template the best. That's my process, but you guys might have a different one. However, this will work either way. The number 1 step is to ultimately figure out who's gonna be involved. Not a hard step, just get, confirmation from your friends. Maybe it's just a personal campaign that you're gonna run with one other player. That is perfectly fine. In fact, that is often much easier. But this structure, what I provided down below, does work for seemingly an unlimited amount of players, though the more you have involved, the more ponderous this whole process is going to become. So keep that in mind. And it's important to have consistent players as well. It's very easy to ruin a campaign if few people just aren't interested in committing to it, and it kind of slows everything else down. Once you have an idea of how many players are going to be involved, who has confirmed that they're interested in taking part in one of your campaigns, you just want to get the armies they're interested in playing down. Maybe they can give you their number 1 pick. Maybe they can give you their top 2 or 3 picks. The more information you have, the better. You don't want to overwhelm your players with too much. Just simply ask them what they feel like they want to play with, and if they want there to be teams, or if they'd all rather vie for victory on their own. Or you could have some players with teams, you could have some players on their own. It's a very flexible system. Or they could all be on one glorious team against you, the arbitrator of the entire campaign, and you'd be playing the NPC factions the entire way through. Whatever you want can work. We're gonna move on to the second step, formatting what the campaign track, map, or whatever concept you want to come up with is going to look like. This is my favorite part about coming up with a campaign, and ultimately helps me decide on what the narrative is going to look like. You need some type of map to follow. And I don't mean some fully developed map with mountains and forests and cities. You can do that, of course. But sometimes a simple approach, especially for your first campaign, can be the most successful. And once you've got your first successful campaign done, and maybe your second or third, you can go to the much more elaborate ones with well thought out maps and paths and very elaborate rules. I myself am guilty of getting very excited and going a little overboard with my campaigns at first for them to ultimately not meet my expectations, and really kind of kills that fire. So I heavily recommend, in my experience, you start very small, very simple, and work your way up and your players up to the point you want to play your campaigns at. Now, I have three major avenues I like to travel down when devising a campaign, especially one with a map campaign, we'll say. And the first one here is going to be the simplest. It is your track. Now, with the track, you have a starting location and your end location for the campaign. And everything in between that is the meat of it and the stories that form before the campaign comes to its culmination at the end here. And with this track campaign, you can keep it very simple. You just have a straight line you follow all the way to the end, or you could make it a little advanced and give them forking routes they have to go down. Maybe it seems that the path here is a little bit easier to go down, but it might have lasting ramifications afterwards. Or maybe you take the path less traveled, the more difficult path, but it obviously rewards you more by going down that path, and maybe it's easier afterwards. Really, it's up to you, the arbitrator, the games master, to decide what the players know going down this track. Maybe you keep it a secret, maybe you make it all open information, maybe they go the harder path because it offers more rewards, or maybe they go the harder path simply because they want a challenge, or maybe they have no idea what either path provides and they're just taking shots in the dark. Ultimately, the track campaign, as we'll call it, is probably my favorite one because it is very easy to manipulate and allow more than just one player to take part of. Say you have a fantasy army marching to go siege an enemy castle. Well, that's just your one track and the path they take to get there. But maybe you have two people on a team that are going to try and siege this castle. Do they follow the same track going down? That could be kind of a problem if they're not there at the same time. But they could have two different tracks they're going down and end up meeting at the same castle they're trying to siege, but they're coming from two different locations, so they follow two different tracks to go there. Maybe you have a third player, boom, all of a sudden a third track, and now they have three different stories you're telling and gonna ultimately end up in one final siege. Maybe one of those players, unfortunately, just has a really rough go of things, and by the time they get there, their force has no support. All of the veterans have been killed. You name it, you know, that's what the track is for, to come up with these ideas. No, maybe scrap the fantasy setting. Maybe we add in a fourth player to this track, and you separate that to two different teams on four different tracks, and in the middle, you have a stranded force of soldiers from, you know, Team A, and they're trying to get there quickly to relieve them, and Team B is trying to quickly get there to eradicate them. And then that's your campaign. You could just kind of reskin it to whatever you need. Hopefully that kind of paints the picture clearer. And the nice thing about a track campaign is you can kind of set how many games you want this campaign to be. Maybe you only want every player to play 3 games. Boom, there's 3 points of interest along this track before, or I guess only 2 points of interest on this track before they get to the final one for the third and final mission of the campaign. Maybe you want it to be 42 missions long. You just make 42 points of interest, and maybe the track branches quite a bit. There's lots of things you could do with the track. It's very flexible, and I like it quite a bit. It's probably my favorite one. But that doesn't mean it's the best one for what you want to run. The next concept would be the web. This typically has your players starting in the smack dab middle of whatever map you've devised. Maybe they play a little skirmish game, a little quick introductory game, and then from there, they are given many options to venture out and do. So instead of following a track from one point to another and the path they take to get there, with the web right in the middle, maybe your players are provided with 4 different missions they have to go take care of, and from those 4 missions, they can then branch out into other directions that connect on the web. Or it could be 8 missions, or 4 missions, or simply just 2. It's really up to you. But some examples of why a web campaign might serve your campaign better is, well, with the web, you have a central focus location, and say the players in your campaign have a certain amount of resources they can allocate to a bunch of smaller missions before ultimately one counterattack from the enemy. We'll use 40K as an example for this one. Your friends are playing a Death Watch campaign, and they have a large force of Death Watch assaulting the heart of an alien fortification, and they crash in there, they eradicate all the enemies there, and the enemies are going to perform a counterattack on this Death Watch location. But the Death Watch have a small amount of time to do these little precision strike missions that will affect the enemy's counterattack, and that would be a good use of a web campaign. We, funny enough, did something like this, but instead of it being Death Watch, it was a Space Marine planet strike instead. The typical Angels of Death have arrived via drop pod assaulting, crushed a single location, and then from there branched out on the web to attack the enemy further in these tiny little quick precision attacks before the enemy could retaliate on them in a much more elaborate planet strike campaign. There's lots of ways you can do the web campaign. Heck, another idea for a web campaign, a small skirmish game perhaps, not a big army-sized game, but a small strike force has to attack a science facility in a modern setting, we'll say. So you choose which avenue you want to enter from, and each one of those avenues will be connected to different rooms in said building, and from there you can travel from room to room. You take your central strike location, and then you branch out from there to all of these rooms, explore these rooms, clear these rooms, and ultimately get to your target. But you don't know where your target is. It's in one of these rooms, and you just keep exploring until you get there. Lots of things you can do with a web campaign. Probably one of my favorites, though a little bit less flexible than the track. The third one is the more advanced one. I mentioned it earlier, your big map that has all your rivers and roads and highways and mountains and cities and all these elaborate elements you can add to your campaign. Now, granted, you actually don't need to include any of that in your map campaign, but with your standard map campaign, you have a geographical location. You can break the location up into territories, or at least like segments, and then you just kind of scatter your players that are all involved in random locations. Think of any map campaign you've played in any video game where you start in one location, all the other players involved start in their other locations, and you just like branch out from there, conquering territories that are neutral nearby you until you ultimately come up against other players. Or maybe you just seed the entire map in territories that all the players own, and you just start going from there, conquering territories back and forth. You would typically use this one for a larger conquest style campaign, which I know a lot of you out there probably would like to do. I know that's my favorite avenue. Those are long campaigns though. They typically don't have a short goal, and you need to play a lot of games for them to feel fulfilling, I suppose, is the word I'd like to use for that. You know, you're not really gonna get like 4 games of a conquest campaign in and feel like you've conquered anything significant. I always recommend using that one for very long-term plans that you know you and your players are gonna commit to. Because again, there's nothing worse than playing 20 to 30 games into a conquest campaign and then half the players have been burnt out and have lost interest and you don't want to finish it. And then, you know, you lack that fulfillment. That's why you probably want to start with the track campaigns or your web campaigns to see how much attention you can get from your players before you want to move on to something a lot more elaborate, like a map conquest type of campaign. But a map can be used for a lot more than just a conquest. You could just use the map to follow how armies or forces move around. Again, these are all just suggestions and ways to inspire you as a games master to run your own campaigns at home. Once you figured out that part, well, welcome to the third step. It's not so hard. You're already pretty much done designing the campaign. Now you just have to decide how elaborate you want it to be. And you can make it as elaborate as you want, though I recommend, like always, keeping it simple at first, especially if you yourself have never run a campaign or your players have never taken part in a campaign either. Again, you know your players better than I do. So try to keep it simple if you're not too sure, but if you know them well, you can make it as elaborate as you want. I provide a list of examples in the document down below. Pretty extensive list, but you might come up with additional ideas reading what I provided down below, and you'd like to apply them to your campaign as well. One of the first things I'd always recommend adding, and probably could roll with it off the rip, is rewards for winning your games. I'd recommend always adding this in right away, or else your games don't really have that connective feeling. Some rewards could be you start small with your forces in your campaign and think of it like a very elaborate path to glory. Every time you win, you get more support from your headquarters, wherever it might be, or maybe you hire new mercenaries if that's what the campaign setting is. Essentially, you simply add new units to your players' rosters every time they complete a game under whatever settings or style you have in mind. Maybe after every battle, the players loot the battlefield and gain more, ammunition, ways to reinforce their armor, or just gold or currency. In the end, it is resources they're looting and gaining. And just simply gaining a resource is more than enough for the players to just seek out more games, because these resources want to be spent. They gain power in their forces to then win more games, to loot more resources, to then spend, and the cycle kind of keeps going and repeating. But hey, if your players, or more importantly yourself, do not want to manage resources and keeping track of them in your first campaign, and everyone's collections are a little too small to constantly be adding new units to their rosters as they grow, well, the easiest one to do, and one that people find the most appealing, is experience gained and special rules gained as well. So say, your players win their first games or lose their first games, they gain some experience from it. Their characters, their generals, their warlords, their more veteran units. You can keep track of experience, or maybe they just always level up after every game. If you're only going to play a handful of games, you want to see growth in every game in that case. And they get better, their characteristics get better, they gain special rules. Maybe you're on a quest to modify this piece of war gear that you're just able to take modifications from the enemy, and in the end you have this very elaborate weapon that's just very powerful. It doesn't really matter, it's really up to you guys, but that is probably the easiest one to implement into your games, and I always recommend that as just rewards for winning the game. Lots of avenues you can go down. In addition to adding rewards for winning, it would make sense to have the mirrored effect in the campaign as well. Now this one you have to gauge your players and ultimately yourself as well. Consequences for failing. Me personally, that is my favorite element of a campaign. Take away all the rewards, take away all that nonsense. I love the struggle. My favorite type of campaign is where you start with a large force and you keep playing out missions, and that force dwindles after every mission. You have no reinforcements, you have no supply lines, and ultimately you're going to lose. But it's how you lose that matters. That's my favorite way to run it. I know that's not a popular way to run campaigns, but consequences for failing can be just a touch, even a minor one, to add to your campaigns to hook your players in and give them that drive to want to win. Some examples are, when your models are removed from play in the game, maybe they don't survive the campaign, or maybe they take lasting injuries that will hinder their capabilities for the rest of the campaign, giving every die that your players roll a lot of weight. And it could be pretty off-putting. Another example is, say they come across their first mission. You don't want to keep track of casualties. People take injuries in battle, but they might just be superficial ultimately, or you get enough reinforcements to bolster any elements you might lose in the game. But say you lose, the enemy can go and maybe they're in a fighting retreat in your campaign, and they just go and reinforce the next node on the track, or they're going to bolster the rest of their forces for the big counterattack coming back. Or maybe you're attacking that location to attack enemy artillery or an enemy leader that you don't want to see later on. And if you fail that mission, you're going to be seeing that enemy artillery or that enemy leader later on. Ultimately, every fail mission makes it easier for the other team to win, or just the final battle that you, the games master, will be controlling much harder for the players. Well, it doesn't have to be much harder, but the knowledge that it will be just even a little bit harder will usually add a lot of weight to the campaign. A final example is during the actual map part of the campaign, when they're moving their forces around on whatever system you decided, you could make it so that every point they choose has even more weight behind it. It comes with a bonus and a negative. You know, some of the bonuses can be very beneficial, but the negatives on that battlefield could just be so miserable to deal with that it is almost a guaranteed loss unless they're really feeling lucky. You know, maybe the entire battlefield is a dangerous battlefield covered in radiation and or other hazardous concepts, and pretty much everyone that falls in that battle will not be recovering, but the reward could be so monumental that it's worth the risk. Or heck, every track could just be a miserable decision. You know, you have to go 2 different locations, and every time you have to go in 2 different locations, ending up in some very elaborate track, and each decision you make just kind of sucks for the other side. You know, maybe your allies are pinned down by enemy fire in one location, but if you go that way and relieve them and win, well, you get extra reinforcements. They join you for the rest of your journey. But on the other side, you have civilians that are unfortunately dying, and you need to go save them. And that will have a major campaign benefit for your forces, an awe-inspiring one when you went to go save the civilians. But then, you know, you left the others to die. And you could mess with your player's psyche and have that be an option in every track they go down. It's really up to you and how elaborate you want the campaigns to be. Maybe they just follow a track, and every time they win, they get a little bonus. And you just keep doing that. And then gauge your players, decide what they like, and the next time you run a campaign, you can add an extra element or 2 to it. By the end of it, you never know. You might end up keeping track of every round fired, how effective your armor is after every mission, food, water, your boots, how many pairs of socks you have left per player. It's up to you. The main thing is to build a system that excites your players. If it's a fun system, it's going to stick, and your guys are going to be looking for more. If it's too elaborate, people feel hesitant, it's okay, trim those elements out. They're not ready for it, or they're just not that interested in it to begin with. You just gotta find the same page that everyone's on. And oftentimes in your first campaign, you're going to probably find elements that the players ultimately didn't like, even if they agreed to go along with it. It's one thing in theory, it's another thing in practice. You have to be okay with removing that stuff and not going further with it. And then afterwards, you can reassess and figure out what everyone is interested in playing. And the final step is just do it. It's simple. Just begin. The next time you and your group are all hanging out, bring up the idea. Don't make it overly complicated. Just kind of present the concept you have. Maybe you like the idea of the track, the web, the map, it doesn't really matter. But if you already have some of the concept ready and your players are interested, just start. Start super easy on the first one. And if they like it, you know, make it a little bit more elaborate. And then more elaborate after that. The important part is you just kind of begin. Even if you're not ready, just start it. And I promise you, you will enjoy the outcome. Or at the very least, you'll figure out that you and your play group do not want to play campaigns, but you figured it out and you tried it out, and now you got there. Which reminds me, it is important to let your players know that campaigns inherently lack balance. Not incredible amounts of balance are lacking, but some elements. Maybe the enemy has 10% more reinforcements this game. Maybe it's dark out and you only have the option to attack at night and you can't see that far. Or maybe the enemy is stronger and faster than you are for whatever reason, and you don't want to engage them and you want to focus on the objective of the mission instead. Those are all the concepts of campaigns, and it's that disparity that makes it exciting. But if that is not the appeal for the players in your campaign, maybe you want to strive for more balance in them as well, which can still be as exciting and it still connects the games together. But that's the beauty of narrative play. It's not about any of that other stuff. It's all about just finding something that you and your friends all really like playing together. Try your best not to get caught in perfectionism. That'll be the death of the campaign for sure. Your players are going to surprise you. They are going to find ways to pull apart your campaign here and there. Just do your best to plug holes and keep it moving. Don't stop for little tiny details. If they're having fun, that's all that matters. Well, you want to have fun yourself too, but got to keep the pace of the game going, you know. I can assure you that the next few campaigns I come up with will not be perfect. They're going to frustrate me and they're probably not going to meet every single expectation I have, but that's kind of the whole process of it. And once you're okay with that part, then you'll probably find yourself a lot more comfortable with running campaigns in the future. And if you want to watch these rules, these concepts in action, like I mentioned earlier, I ran a Horus Heresy 3rd edition campaign with our friend Gavin, where he starts with a small force, seemingly no need for combat whatsoever, treachery arises, and well, there was combat. So we start small and we work our way big. It was a very elaborate Path to Glory campaign, I like to call it for that. And upcoming, in a few months from now, I believe, there will be a Planet Strike campaign where I showcase how a web campaign might work. But if you want the proof of concept, well, look no further than that Horus Heresy video, link down below in the description. I hope this video has inspired you to look at starting your own campaigns, or if you already have thought about it, maybe get back to those ideas and start working on them again. If it does, I'd love to hear it in the comments down below. I always do. I read them all, and I love to interact with you guys at home. I want to hear your ideas, what cool campaigns you've come up with. Maybe I'll use them for the future myself. I'll catch you guys in the future next time. As always, happy wargaming and toodaloo.